The wind howled across the barren prairie as if mourning for her, carrying with it the sharp scent of winter and the echoes of a woman's sobs drifting from the sagging barn behind the Dawson homestead, where Clara Dawson clutched her newborn daughter as though her trembling arms alone could shield the child from the cruelty of the world. She had known the moment the tiny girl was placed in her arms that her husband, Eli Dawson, a man whose heart had hardened like dried mud long before their wedding day, would not forgive the child for being born a girl instead of the son he demanded, and when he stormed into the barn with whiskey on his breath, shouting about curses and worthless daughters, Clara curled her body over her baby and pleaded, but her pleading only met the cold brutality of his fists, each blow falling with the heavy certainty of a life she feared she could not escape. Yet even in her agony she whispered promises into her daughter's ear. Promises of safety, of love, of a future where the child would never again hear her mother cry in the dark. But fate, strange and shifting as desert sand, drew near in the steady approach of hoofbeats crunching frozen soil, belonging to Sheriff Wyatt Hale, a widower known for his quiet strength and the simple silver band he still wore in memory of the wife he had buried 3 winters earlier. A man whose grief had carved deep lines into his face yet whose heart remained anchored to justice even when the frontier seemed determined to bury the good along with the bad, and it was justice that guided him to the Dawson ranch that night after a neighbor reported hearing screams and seeing Clara collapse earlier in the day at the well, but Wyatt had arrived too late to stop the blows, just in time to see Eli Dawson dragging Clara toward the house, the baby wailing in the cold, and when Eli swung again, Wyatt's hand shot out with the speed of a striking snake, seizing the man's wrist and wrenching it back until Eli howled, stumbling away while Wyatt stepped between him and Clara, his gaze burning with a fury that needed no words. Still, he spoke them anyway, his voice low and lethal. "Raise your hand to them again, and I'll bury you before dawn." Clara, dazed and bruised, pressed her baby close, her entire body shaking as she looked up at the sheriff whose shadow fell over her like shelter, and something in his eyes, a warmth, a steadiness, made the terror ebb just enough for her to breathe. But Eli, driven by rage and humiliation, lunged toward Wyatt with a knife pulled from his boot, and the sheriff moved with the effortless swiftness of a man who had survived 2 decades of gunfights and ambushes, twisting Eli's arm until the knife clattered to the ground, then slamming him against the barn wall before shackling his wrists with a calm efficiency that made Clara finally believe she was safe. For the first time in years, as Eli cursed and spat, Wyatt led him to his horse and tied him to the saddle, then returned to Clara, who struggled to rise but stumbled, and he caught her, lifting both mother and baby into his arms as though they weighed nothing, carrying them through the snow toward his wagon where warm blankets waited. She tried to speak, to apologize for being trouble, but Wyatt shook his head, brushing a strand of hair from her face with surprising gentleness, telling her she had done nothing wrong, that the only crime committed here tonight was against her, and he would see justice done before sunrise. The ride back to town was cold but strangely peaceful, the baby quieting against her mother's heartbeat, and Clara, exhausted beyond measure, drifted in and out of consciousness, waking fully only when Wyatt carried her into his home, a sturdy cabin on the hill overlooking the town, still filled with the ghostly warmth of his late wife's presence, yet touched now by something new, something fragile and alive, and he laid her on the couch beside the fire, placing the baby in her arms before brewing herbal tea the way his wife once had, his rough hands surprisingly deft as he tended her wounds and tucked a quilt around her. In the soft glow of the firelight, Clara watched him move with a quiet competence that made her realize he had lived too long in silence and loneliness, burying his grief beneath duty, and as he finally sat across from her, elbows on his knees, he asked the question she had long feared to hear. "Do you have anywhere safe to go?" And when she shook her head, tears sliding silently down her bruised cheeks, he nodded once as though he'd already expected that answer, saying, "Then you stay here, both of you, until you're strong again." And something warm bloomed in her chest, a fragile seed of hope she hadn't dared to feel. Over the next days, Clara saw sides of the sheriff she never imagined. How he held the baby with gentle awe, how he checked on her every hour without making her feel weak, how he cooked simple meals and insisted she eat first, how he quietly repaired the rocking chair his wife once used and placed it beside the fire so Clara could feed her daughter in comfort. But what shook her most was the way he spoke to the baby, calling her "little warrior," as though the child he first saw on a night of violence embodied survival itself. Rumors spread through town, as they always do, but Wyatt ignored them, standing tall beside Clara at every turn, escorting her to the doctor, helping her file charges, never once letting her face a single moment alone. And slowly, as winter thawed and the first green shoots pushed through the earth, Clara felt the bruises inside her begin to heal, not just the ones Eli left but the deeper ones carved by years of fear, and she found herself watching Wyatt with a sense of gratitude that grew into something she couldn't name, something terrifying and beautiful, something that felt like dawn after too many nights. One evening, as she rocked her daughter by the fire and Wyatt fixed a broken drawer in the kitchen, Clara whispered, "Why did you help us?" And Wyatt paused, his shoulders tightening before he answered softly, "Because someone I loved once needed help, and no one came. I swore I'd never let that happen again." And Clara understood then that his kindness came not from pity but from a wound of his own, and she reached out, touching his hand with the gentlest courage she'd ever summoned, telling him, "You saved us." And in the silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a promise, a beginning. The town would one day tell stories about the widowed sheriff who took in a broken woman and her infant daughter, about how their quiet home became a place of laughter and second chances, about how a man grieving his past and a woman fleeing hers built a future together. But for now, there was only the crackle of the fire, the warmth of safety, and the soft sigh of a baby sleeping in her mother's arms. And to everyone watching this story unfold, remember, strength is born in struggle, love rises from ashes, and hope grows where you least expect it. So if this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales just like this one, and become part of the family that believes in resilience, kindness, and second chances.